Hello? Okay. Sorry, we'll be starting in just a few minutes. Get comfortable. Get yourself something to drink if you'd like, your handwork, and we'll get started. There it is. Three minutes. We'll get started. Hi everybody, welcome to StashBlaster Quilts. My name is Maria and I am here to help you make more quilts in less time with less stress. This is a favorite hobby for most of us and it should be fun and relaxing, and so I want to make it so you have as few bubbles along the way as possible. Now, we do talk about some fairly simple things here, but we will also talk about more complex as well. So just come along for the ride. Now, we always start with a tip during these live streams, which are the first and third Wednesday of every month. So the tip for this week is about storage. Not the fabric we've talked about, not your squares, etc. This is a little bit more on tool storage, but it's a specific category of tools that I use a lot. And so I have caddies that I keep near every one of my workstations in the home where I might sit down and do a little bit of handwork, or here where I do the bulk of my main machine sewing. So I'd like to show you a couple of these things. Now, one of my favorites I actually won during a guild meeting that I attended, and it was this little organizer here. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch cameras and tip it on its side, so this might get a little weird, but come along for the ride. Okay, so this is what this little caddy looks like. I hope that this is clear enough. Let me try to, there we go. So they have this, it's easier to see on this one. This is the same pattern as on my little one here. It's like these flower shapes or these interconnecting circles, however you want to think about them. And what's nice is that they expand really far and the petal parts are not connected. So you can put something really big and fat in here and it'll be just fine. But I have these all over my house, and so this is a typical one. So what have I got in here? I have a nail file, because it's quite often that I'll find that I'll have a snag and it'll catch on thread or it'll catch on the fabric itself. It can be an emery board like this, or it may be a metal file. I have a paintbrush. I use this little one here next to my main machine, and this is what I use to clean my bobbin case. Every time I change my bobbin, I use this and I clean out that whole little area everywhere I can reach with a brush. So that's always handy. I have pens, I've got a couple of them here, and I have mechanical pencils. Now, I like mechanical pencils because then I don't have to have a sharpener handy. I also will usually have a colored pencil. So if I want to have a design that I'm doing and I want to designate light, medium, and dark, I'll use the paper color for light. I'll probably use the red in this case, but it could be green or blue, whatever colored pencil I happen to have handy, as my medium, and then the lead color as my dark. I will keep a seam ripper. Whether it's this kind, I have the ones that are lighted with magnifying glasses, etc. I keep a small pair of scissors. I keep a needle threader. And I keep a chapstick of some sort. I find that I don't drink as much when I'm sewing, and so I tend to dry out, especially in the winter. So I always have something like this that I can put on my lips for when they get dry. And you can see it has, oh, maybe you can't. Here you go. It has expanded this hole. If I leave this alone, it'll go back to normal. But this is oversized and it fits in there just fine. So this is the itty bitty one that I won, and so this is the one I've used, here we go, for the longest time, which is why most of the spots are full. You can actually completely fill this if you wanted to, let's say, put out a ton of different colored pencils, but then they can be kind of hard to get out of the middle when you're trying to draw them out. So I like having some space. So this is the one that I keep next to my machine. The blue tape is just here because this happens to be a branded product, and there's a bunch of them out there that aren't, and so I don't want you thinking that that's the only place to get these. So I also have some that are this size. Actually, let me bring the little one back. And you can see it's about twice the size. Now, I will often have these as well, because I can put some small rulers in there. If If there's other things I need in other parts of the house, then having the larger size is handy. If you have a lot of things that are tall, if you think about it this way, if they're tall this way, it'd make it easier for it to tip because there's not a whole lot of oomph this direction. It's never going anywhere this direction, but it could tip this way. So I also found these. Now this is not the same pattern on the inside, but hopefully you can see it well enough. Here we go. And because they're hearts, they happen to be hearts. You can get them with different shapes as well. A taller set of items aren't going to tip because there's enough weight to the unit itself and a broad enough base that it's a little bit more secure. So something like this, I might put things like metal nail files, nail clippers, taller rulers, those kinds of things where it's going to be a better fit. I also use these things for makeup. I know, all right, let me switch back. Obviously, I don't wear a lot of makeup. When I am giving speeches to a guild or if I'm giving speeches at a convention, yeah, I do my hair all up, I do full makeup, the whole 9 yards. The reason that I don't do it for you is not because I don't love you. I do, I truly do. But since a lot of times I'm coming home from a job organizing and they can be really dirty and I may not have time to do makeup, I want you to get kind of used to how I am most of the time. If I ever come to speak at your guild, you'll find that I will dress up and I will look a lot better and younger than I do when I'm here. But this is what you get for live. Okay, so that's our tip, is that these kinds of storage units, whether it's something with this center design or this center design, doesn't really matter how it's designed in the middle. The idea is that it has a lot of expansion, it has a solid enough base that it's going to be able to do what you want, and it's an appropriate size. When I am going to a retreat, I take the little bitty one. If I am just sitting at my chair, what I'll often do, if I'm doing like an English paper piecing project, I'll put some of my papers in here, and it keeps them all nice and neat, and it keeps them, if this falls over, the rubber tips here will hold on well enough that they don't wind up all over the floor, because I am a natural born klutz. So that's why I tend to use these ones. But the little one is fine for most people for next to your chair. If you don't have a lot of sewing space, something like this, you could just take with you wherever you go, and then it works out really nicely as well. And because of this small size, if you were to keep, let's say, a box from cereal, or let me try to think of what other boxes are this size, linguine, or elbows or mac and cheese, as long as it is wide enough for this base to fit, you could put this into that box for travel, and then that would keep everything all nice and neat and contained. Maybe you need a shorter paintbrush than what I have here. I keep thinking that you can see my hands. I'm sorry. Let me back it up a little bit. Let's see if this will help. And maybe no, it doesn't seem to make a big difference. Well, a little bit. Okay, so maybe a shorter paintbrush here, and then this, if it's in a box that closes, even if it gets banged around, your stuff isn't going to go anywhere. So again, for a quick recap, pens and pencils, brush, nail file, some sort of a chapstick, scissors, threader, and you're pretty much good to go. So this is all you need for doing any sort of a handwork you're doing, whether it's putting on a binding or if it's English paper piecing something. I am currently working on several hexagon quilts, partially because I got a hexagon punch and I had so much fun punching out cardboard, whether it was, it's not cardboard, excuse me, cardstock. Whether it was junk mail that came into the house or whatever, I punched out a few thousand of these things. And so I have several designs for hexagon quilts that I'm going to be working on, and those are going to be how I'm going to use all of those. So anyway, so that's what's going on with that. Anyway, Now, after the tip, and if you've enjoyed this, by the way, please click subscribe. The bell will let you know when I'm going to be back or when I've posted something. And if you like it, that's even better. So please feel free to like, hit the bell, and subscribe. After we do the tip, then we are working on a project as a group, if this is your first time. And so if you can look just here past my sign. Now, it's going to be cockeyed. It's actually straight. This one you're looking at is on a really strong angle because of where my camera is. So I know this is a little bit disconcerting and I apologize. I'm trying to find the right place to put the camera so that I look straight and other things look straight. And I can't seem to get all of that to work together. I'm considering putting a camera across the room, but then as soon as it's zoomed in, I still get this weird wonkiness. So, by the way, this does say mail at StashBlasterQuilts.com. If you want to send me any questions, if you need clarification on what we're doing, you can go ahead and email me there. I do have a website. It's not up right now. Every time we get it up, it comes back down. I think it has something to do with the hosting service, but we haven't been able to prove that yet. So I apologize, but for right now, we're going to have to do it through email still. So actually, before we get to this, let me bring you back over here to this camera. So this is our design. Now, I know it's a little hard to see and I apologize, but this middle here is 12 2.5-inch raw, 2-inch finished quarter square triangles, but they're not cut square, so they're not squares. That just sounds weird. Let me show you what I mean. What we did is we took oversized 4 patches like this. Okay? And then I've got a ruler here. Let me put this to the side. I could trim this up, if you look here, to easily a 3 and maybe a 3.5-inch square. This would line up like that. It'd be the 1.5. Well, 3.5 would be like so, because it would be 1.5 would be 3. It's been a long day. I'm sorry. Okay. So I could square this up at 3.5, right like that. However, what we're doing instead is instead of cutting this to its maximum possible size, we are cutting everything wonky. So in this case, it would be a 2.5-inch square. So just to make this a little bit easier, I'm going to get out one of my favorite tools here. This is just regular old painter's tape. I actually do have a small square, but I wanted to show you how to do this. I like trimming stuff when I have a ruler that size, just because it's easy. You plop it down and then you just turn it and turn it and turn it. But if you don't have a ruler the size that you want, you can just do this to make sure that you're on point. So this is 2.5. So you plop it in place and you can see where your 2.5 would be. Now you can, in this particular case, I could slide this way over. As long as my 2.5 is here, I'm good. It can be rotated more or less. Okay, with a 3.5-inch, I can almost get, there is a tiny bit of tip hanging off the edge here. I can almost get a quarter square triangle out of this, but I don't want that. I want it to be wonky. And so I have several examples here that have been trimmed. A couple of them are the same, but you get the idea. Okay, so when I put them together, they are definitely not your normal 4 patches. If I wanted it to be normal, it would come out looking a little bit more like this. These have not been trimmed up either, but you'll get the idea. Okay? And so these are all square. All these are straight lines as they connect, going up and down and side to side. But that's not what I wanted in this case. So we used larger than necessary to make a regular 4-patch and made these smaller 4 patches here. So now, when I push this back over here, what you can see here is that I've taken a bunch of these and I've put them together. Now, if you go back to one of the older lives, you'll see that we looked at a couple of different design options, including making it so that all of the lights were together. In my case up here, my light is in the upper left-hand corner for every block. Now, some of them are white, some of them are white-ish. Some go a little bit darker, like this one, which is more of a tan, but nothing darker than that. Okay? And so they just get randomly oriented. My plan is not to have more than 2 of any exact combination. So if you look back here, boom, I have 2 here that are an exact match in terms of the fabrics that are being used. The white matches, which is this white polka dot. I don't know if you can see this here. Can you see the polka dots? Okay, that's the same on both of these. And then the blue fabric is, of course, the same. So no more than 2. And then what I'm doing is I'm scattering them far apart. So you can see there's a yellow and green that's right here. And then there's another one right there. And they've been cut very differently as well. So there are a couple of duplications, but no more than 2. The other ones that I have that match, and this one I showed you, this blue and white one is a match, is going to go into another one of these that I'm doing. So I'm actually going to do at least 2 of these and maybe more all at the same time, because I believe that in processing them all at the same time, I can have some efficiency of scale going there. Now, this doesn't work for everyone. If you are the kind of person who wants to do one at a time, you do one at a time. If you want to do the small center, then look at it and decide, is this what I want? Do I want to make more of this quilt or not? That's fine too. Okay? Because the whole idea behind this particular quilt is we're designing it together. So I put out options, people voted, they chose this quilt, and I'll show you here in just a second what the final quilt will look like in broad strokes. And then we're working on it together. The goal was to have something that would last the whole year, but because this is using leftover orphan 4 patches, or you can take quarter square triangles and cut them wonky and you get the same look. This one is actually going to be done early, and so we're going to talk about some other ones as the year goes on. But I wanted to leave enough time because some of the designs that I offered, the concepts, I could tell were going to take a long time to actually pattern, and construction and everything was going to be much more intensive. So this one will be quick, which is nice. And it uses up all those orphans that we have. As of right now, I haven't had to cut a single, I haven't had to make a true 4 patch in order to cut it wonky for this entire thing. However, if I did, then I can go ahead and make those and just make the few that I need in the colors that'll balance it out if I'm uneven. I kind of wanted this to look generally like confetti. I have found that by having the left-hand corner dominant, I am getting the hint of some diagonals that go across in both directions. More so, for some reason, upper right to lower left. But I think that if I put in some more that the white is not as bright, it'll break that up. But it does give your eye a path as well, which can be a good thing. So it's going to be kind of a balancing act at the end. So let's talk about the actual design. So the middle is going to be a 12 by 12 grid of these 2.5 inch raw half square triangles. Now, it's the 2.5 raw because we want 2 inch finished, and we are going to need 144 of them, right? 12 times 12 is 144. This is based on the idea of making this quilt that will be 48 by 72. If you want a narrower quilt, take out some rows. But remember, you're going to have to take out 8 inches worth because we have to deal with having one of these blocks go as well. So that means that you would lose 4 by whatever your length is, in this case 12. You'll lose 48 blocks in your 2 inchers, 8 of your 4s and 4 of your 8 inch. So I would redraw this if I were you, if I was going to change the sizes rather than just go with this original rough sketch. Okay, but I liked kind of having the middle, and then we're going to expand out as we go. This is going to make a 48 by 72. Once our center is done, then we'll add on 4-inch twisted 4-patch blocks on the outside, and then once they're done, then the 8-inch, and that's going to give us a 48 by 72. So it's 144 2-inch finished, 44 4-inch finished, and 34 8-inch finished. So let's look at the wall a little bit. Okay, so I've put up some 2s. It's only about a quarter of them. It's a little bit more than a 6 by 6 grid because I've got these extra pieces hanging out at the bottom. But actually, why don't I go ahead and get rid of those for you. All right, we're going to take these off. Now, remember, we're going to have seam allowances, so this is not going to have everything line up the way it would when it's done. All right, I'm going to just take these, stick in a pin. The only reason I'm using a pin is so that I can move stuff around and not have them fly off. When I'm not doing anything in my sewing room very much, then I don't bother with the pins. I just put things up to design. So once our center is done, then these 4-inchers will go on. Okay, and like I said, these are off on scale because we have these seam allowances in the middle that would shrink this by a 1/2 inch. Okay, but you can kind of see how this would go. All right, and so when it's done, oops, upper left. Now see, here's a duplication. The whites, actually no, it's not. I'm sorry, it just looks similar. I apologize. That is a different material. And so is this one. Boy, I have a lot of red here. Let me grab some of these other ones. Get some color variety in here. And again, this I have a yellow, so it's not a true white, nor is this cream color. But it's enough to give it a little bit of interest. It's not all the same background. You can certainly have the same background though. Okay, so this will give you an idea. Now, we actually have 2 rows at the top and the bottom, because if we just did one around and then one around and then one around, we'd wind up with a 48-inch square quilt, which is not a problem, but it's not big enough to cuddle under. So I wanted, this is going to be a couch quilt probably for me. So that's why I did it this way. So there will be 2 rows of 4-inch blocks at the bottom per our design, and then 1 on the side. Okay. Now, we're going to pretend that this keeps going up. And since you can't really see it at the moment, I'm just going to let it go like that. Okay? Let me push this in so that it's a little bit flatter. Okay, so then once our 4-inch blocks are all on, then we'll add the 8-inch blocks, like this. Okay. Well, I'm off a little bit, because this one would actually line up down here like this. Now, how do I know that? Because this is going to line up, this is going over paper, which is why it's not sticking, with this double row here of 4s. So that's why I'm putting it on like that. Because I'm going to have a double row down here of 8s as well. But the first one will go on like this. Okay. And then we'll have another one underneath. Now here's one I actually had trouble with because in my head, because the spots are fairly bright, but that's my light color compared to my more mottled purple here, even though the purple is a fairly light purple. So I had to think about how I wanted to use that one. But you can see that this is our center, then we have our 4-inch blocks, and then our 8-inch blocks. And you can see that we don't have any solid, well, this isn't too bad, but actually if this was right up to where it's supposed to be, these are not going to line up in any of these intersections for the middle of the 4 patches. However, we will line up here with these two, when we take and we sew these 4 2-inch blocks into a 4 patch, then it will line up with this 4 patch. Does that make sense? And then this set of 4 will line up with this one. Then we'll put them together and make a giant 4 patch. Hold on, let me put these down. That will look like that. Okay? And then we can add this 8 to these, because this will total 8 inches, right, from here to here. All right, let me take these off. This was so much easier and made more sense in my head. Okay, so when this goes like this, all right, then these will line up. Okay, and so we'll go across like that. By assembling, by laying this out like this and putting this into a 4 patch, then this becomes the same size as the block next to it. And when we take these and make it a 4 patch, it becomes the size of the one next to it. And so that way it'll be easier to construct. Like I said, all of these 4 patches, almost all of them, I can't promise you all of them, but almost all of them are not going to align. So you're not going to have to worry about matching your seams. So as an example, although these are cut similarly, right, you can tell that if I were sewing them together, they're not going to overlap. So I'm not going to have to worry about having too much bulk in my seams. Now, when I'm putting them together, they're not going to overlap there, but they will overlap with the ones right above. Okay, so when I have this 4 patch like this, let's hold it like this, okay? And I have another 4 patch down here, then this seam will align with this 4 patch and the next one. So we are going to have to match some seams later. So one of the things that I talked about in one of these other get-togethers was the fact that I always sew my 4 patches with my seam facing into the machine. So when I have my seam on the top, like this, okay? So I have my... Okay, here's my 4 patch, okay? And so let me change cameras here. Okay. When I am sewing these together, okay, here's the flap. Do you see that? I always put them through my machine so that this flap is on top. Now, whether it's on top or on bottom doesn't matter. It's whichever you're comfortable with. I like to have it on top so that it forces these 2 seams to butt tighter together, because I'm a little bit anal retentive about my centers, okay? But whichever way you pick is fine. Just pick one way, because then that way, once I've done my second seam to make the 4 patch, I can press opposite directions and get this spin in the middle, right? And what that does for me is it lessens the bulk in the middle. So once I have this, and I have another one that's pressed the same way, okay, you can tell, right, left, okay? When I go to put them together, these are going opposite directions, so they will butt up next to each other, okay? Now, the problem with this is that when you put these together and you sew them together, it will be the flap going the other way, okay? But that's okay. It'll just spin the opposite direction, which is really nice. And it does that in both directions. So here, these two will go together. And down here, row to row, these two will go together. So everything will butt together much nicer if you've picked a direction to put your 2 patches through that make the 4 patch, and if you press them like this. Now, another option is always to press your seams open. Okay, if you do that, then you'll have less bulk in the middle, and it won't make a difference in terms of which way the seams are going, in terms of whether they'll butt up or not. Because if you have it where the flaps are both going the same direction, you wind up with so many layers on one side and almost nothing on the other side. And so you can wind up with humps that can be really hard to quilt out, and it can make your quilt ripple. So you want it to be as even as possible, which is why spinning your center seams helps. But if you press everything open, that's fine. It's a little bit more difficult to align your seams that are matching. Of course, we have fewer of those in this quilt. It's only the major, the 4 patches when they're getting sewn to each other that we're going to have that situation happen. However, whatever works for you is fine. I just prefer to have it folded over, because if I have an issue with the seam, I don't want to have any of the batting working its way out through it if it's not tight enough. Or if it pops, it's harder, on my view, sorry, I touched my microphone, I hope that wasn't too loud. It's harder, in my view, to make that repair. I'm going to tip this down a little bit. There we go. Because I'm seeing myself like making motions and you can't see them. It's easier, in my opinion, to repair it if there's a flap, okay, so that it's going like this. When this opens, I can more easily fix it than if it's an open seam, because then it's pulling itself apart, and now I have to kind of lasso it and cinch it together rather than just tack it down in a way that'll put the seam back together. So, but again, that's me. So whichever way works better for you, I'm all on board. One of the things that you're going to learn here, if this is your first time, is that there's a ton of different ways to do everything. And I try to expose you to a couple of different ways so you can find the one that works best for you. For me, it works better to fold the seam over whenever practical, and then to spin my center seams whenever I can, just to keep everything lying flat and even. Now, there are some times that you can't do that. There are some blocks, yeah, you really do need to press open. Like if you are doing the middle of a compass, you have so many layers there that trying to figure out how to make them lie flat is hard enough anyway. So unless they're all facing the same way as you go around, and that you have to calculate, sometimes just pressing it open is easier. So I'm all for that in that particular instance. But for what we're doing right now, and for this quilt, we're going to go ahead and say, okay, we're going to do our center first in terms of making sure we've laid it out, and then we will assemble those into 4 patches, and then the 4 patches to the 4-inch blocks, and then the newly created 8-inch blocks to the 8-inch blocks. Really quite simple. Now, how do you keep track of which square goes where once you've laid it out on your design wall? There's a million ways to do that. My favorite way is painter's tape. I will take my roll of painter's tape, which is right in this little set of drawers right next to my sewing station usually, but since I was using it earlier, it's here. And I cut just a little tiny piece off like that, and I'll put a number on it, and it'll say like 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D. Or there's just some days, when I don't know why, where it might be A1, A2, A3, A4, whichever way works for you is best. In this particular case, I would probably do 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D for my center. Because when I make those 4 patches, so each 4 patch would have either a common letter or number, and then the others would be in the same positions. And I have been known to take a piece of paper and make a chart, and then when I'm sewing it together, so let me just show you here. So, oh, you can't see that. Hold on. Switch camera. Okay. So I will post this right across the room from me. And so I know A is going to go on the top left, B on the top right, C on the lower left, D on the lower right. And I will refer to this every time I'm getting my 4-patch ready to sew. So I will be doing 1A and 1B, 2A and 2B, 3A, 3B, etc. And then 1C, 1D, 2C, 2D, 3C, 3D, etc. And then I will make sure that they're aligned properly, and also AB to CD. And so that means this block is done. This is number 1. And then number 2 and number 3. Okay? My advantage to doing it this way, and by using the painter's tape, is that A, it's cheap. A roll like this, even though I do quite a bit of small piece sewing, will last me at least a year. Okay? I will also be able to take it off, and then I can assign new numbers. So if I wanted to now have, let's say, this one is actually a 4-patch. And this is a 4-patch. And this is my first row of my 4-inch blocks, and these are my 2-inch 4-patches here that have been now sewn into a 4-patch, right? I can still do 1A, 1B for this entire 4-patch, 1C, 1D when I label them with my painter's tape. Another advantage to using the painter's tape is that it's not going to fall out as you sew or move things around to get things pressed. So you're not poking yourself on pins, etc. There's a lot of people who will take a photograph and then print the photograph and then number the photograph. That's fine as long as you're designing and taking photographs in small chunks. If you took an overall picture of this quilt when it's done at 48 by 72, it will be very difficult to number these ones in the middle and still be able to see which ones they are. Because the 4-patches in the middle are going to be minuscule, right? So if you put a number on that, you're going to blank out most of your fabric. So I would say if you want to do this, I would take our 12 by 12 here in the middle, okay? And then I would, because we know that we want to do this in 4 patches, I would do it like this. I would just divide it up into the 4 patches that I need, because each one of these is going to get a number, right? All right, and I would number them 1A, etc. But I would only take a picture, probably, let me get out my colored pencil, of no more than 4 of these. Because you're going to have all your little detail in here. Okay, because these are all the 4 patches, right? So this giant 4-patch, or 16-patch, or whatever you want to call it, right, is going to have enough detail if that's the only one that you take. Oh, you can't see the red on here very well. Let me color this a little bit more. Okay, let me bring this down. Maybe you can... There we go. That's better, right? So I would take a picture of this set. So it would be a 4x4 of my 2-inch 4 patches. All right? And then there would be this set of 4, and then this set of 4, this one, this one, this one, this one, and then this one. Okay? So that means we've turned this into a 9 patch, right? You can see that. So I would have 9 photos of my 2-inch finish, so 2.5-inch squares, in order to go ahead and take those photos. I hope that that makes sense. Now, once your center medallion is done, then you could probably say, okay, I'm just going to do half in each direction, right? In terms of taking the photo, because you already have these ones made, and so it'll be easier to tell which is which when it's time to assemble them, like so. Okay? And then you can go on from there. But I would go ahead, if this were me, I would do the 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D, 2A, 2B, 2C, 2D, each one of those through the middle, okay, until I have 6 by 6, so that's 36 numbers with 4 letters after each one. And then I would get that all done. And then when I was doing the next set, I would number this number 1. I got fabric under there. This would be number 1. This would A, 2, 1B, 1C, 1D. And so then I would assemble this 4 patch, and then this 4 patch. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. I'm trying to look on my camera to make sure it makes sense to with how this is spaced to you versus how I'm holding my pencil to me. And then when I'm done with that, and these 4 patches have all been made, so this 1A through 1D is done, I would take the stickers off, and then I would start up here, where this is 1. Okay, and you can either number them in numerical order, or 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D. Because it works out that this happens to be 3 4 patches across. Okay? So it'll still work. So you can use the same method to where these are all 4 patches being assembled all the way around, rather than doing it and trying to put this whole row together and then this whole row together and get the seams to line up. And then this whole row, which you would in order to put this one on, you'd have to assemble all of these. And then this whole row, you can if you want to, but I would find it easier to do this in the 4 patches. So by using the painter's tape, I can take it downstairs, get everything pressed so no pins get lost, nothing gets hung up on something else. It's just the paper tape, the painter's tape. And then when I'm done, they peel off and I don't have any problems. No marks in the fabrics, so if you're ever doing anything where you want to use it on something like a silk or a sateen, test it first. Always test it first. But the advantage is that by using the tape, you're not putting holes in the fabric. Now, I would keep the marks away from where you're ironing, just for convenience sake. I have ironed the painter's tape on my quilts, sometimes multiple times before quilts assembled. It's up to you whether you're comfortable with that or not. But again, this is dirt cheap, and it takes a long time to go through it. So if you wanted to put 1A and 1B together, press it, and then label it 1AB, you can do that. I don't think it's worth the effort to me. Once I have the 4 patch done, that's good enough for me. But it's completely flexible in that way. So let's come back to this. And let me raise this up so that the whole page is visible. So I got an email from someone who said, what if I don't want to do 48 by 72? That's perfectly fine. One thing to keep in mind is that as you change your measurements, everything has to be evenly divisible by the 8 in the middle. Because let's say you only took out one of the 4-inch rows, you will not be able to put your 8-inch blocks on the outside. Now, if you want to make it smaller, you either divide it in such a way that you have an even number of 8-inch blocks, or you can go ahead and say, okay, I want fewer of the 2-inch ones. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to design this where everything shifts in. So these 8-inch goes away and they become here and here. The problem is going to be you're only going to have 4s and 8s. Because by the time we add in the 4 patches, you start having problems. You can just say, okay, I want to do all 2-inch. You can make those whatever size you want. You can add 2s and 4s together. The nice thing about this is you can make it work no matter how you want your finished size to end up, no matter what you have your final size end up. But it does mean it's worth drawing out, because it's very easy to say, oh, well, I'm only going to be dropping this by 6 inches. And then you find when you draw it, something doesn't add up. So it could be that maybe you decided to do this at 2, 3, and 4 inches. That's fine. However, everything then has to be divisible by both 3 and 2. Otherwise, the numbers won't work out. Okay? So definitely, if you're going to change this, I would draw it out myself. If you want to, you can send me an email and say what size you want this to be, and I will give you my suggestion as to how you do that. But since we're trying to use up old 4 patches that we already have, if you were to reach out to me and say, you know what, Maria, I have a ton of 4 patches that I can cut down to 4.5, but I have almost no 2s. Okay, nothing I can cut down to 2.5. Can I just do it out of 4.5? Sure. You'll wind up with 4-inch finished squares. You figure out what size you want your quilt, and that's how many squares you need. So part of designing a quilt is figuring out what your final sizes are going to be and how to get the pieces that you want to make to fit into that size. In this particular case, we have the added complication of wanting to use up those orphan blocks that we have. If you said to me, I'm just going to go ahead and sew my original 4 patches, then what we could do is say, okay, what size do you want? Create the design that you want, and then you sew the 4 patches that you need in order to have them and cut them wonky. I hope that makes sense. I was also asked to clarify what to do with the parts that we cut off, because I did talk about that, but apparently I didn't make much sense. So, and there are definitely days when that becomes the case. So, welcome to my scrap bin from this project. Okay? Now, you can see with some of these that when I cut them, this is not of a sufficient size that I can do anything with this and still have the greens show. Okay? That's just way too small. It doesn't mean I can't use this piece in some other form in order to either make new 4 patches or to use it in improvisational quilting or any one of a number of other things. Okay? But if it's been cut such that there's little tiny pieces like that, you can either unsew them, if you want to use that term. You can cut this just off. I would probably just this little edge, I would either cut off or I would pull it off like that. Now I have a triangle to work with. But most of my scraps are going to look like this, where there is a little meat on the bone for both colors. Okay? Now, if you wanted to, you could go ahead and create new 4 patches just by flipping it over, and now you've got a regular 4 patch. This would wind up being teeny weeny, because remember, I'm going to lose my seam allowance here. I wouldn't recommend it with this particular size, but when they're this size, okay, And let's see if I can find another piece like so. Okay. If I were to go ahead and sew these together, is this a regular 4-patch? No. Is there any reason I couldn't use this in this particular quilt? No. So if I sewed these together, I'd have to offset just a little bit so that my 1/4 inch is lined up. Let me do this like this. Okay, I'm just going to do this as a rough. So let me grab a pin. And I'm going to just tug one off my design wall here. If I were to sew these, okay, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to butt these up just to try to give you an idea. And then line them up. And then sew them on the 1/4 inch, which is approximately here. And I'm going to just put an extra wiggle in my pin to give me a little bit of flexibility while I'm showing this, okay? When I open this, my 4-patch is not going to be precisely aligned. It's actually not bad in this case. So this would be good enough for this kind of a quilt. But if I sew these together, they might be way off. And if they are, then they are. This quilt doesn't matter as much. In this particular case, they lined up pretty well. So I'm going to do it this way without the pin in there just so it looks a little better. I could make a 4-patch like this and then cut it wonky. Like so. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay? So if you have these big, if you created your 8-inch ones first, if you had any that you needed to sew, then you could use the scraps to make what you need to make your 4-inch finished and your 2-inch finished blocks. So in this particular case, I'd have a 2-inch. There's other things you could do. You could go ahead and square them up just into regular 2 patches and then do something with them. You could do improvisational quilting where you take something like that and then maybe a piece like this and sew them together, right? And then that's assuming we were just using this bin. You could also use, squares that you have from other places. Oh, here's a nice one. Then maybe this one comes in kind of wild like that. And then this big old honkerin piece comes in sort of like this, right? Now, we're pretending the seam allowances aren't there, obviously, but you can see that you could just juxtapose these until you wound up with a larger equivalent of what I call chip blocks. And then you could go ahead and cut a block for anything you wanted to cut a block from out of it, because you've created your own fabric now. So something like this, maybe you want to put chip blocks in as the centers for flying geese. It adds a lot of interest. It adds some really neat coloring, and they're one-of-a-kind blocks. So even if you use the 5-square method, if your big square is assembled like this improvisationally, when you cut that up, all 4 of those geese are going to look different. So it's a fun way to do it, and it's going to be something that'll be uniquely yours. It'll match whatever other colors that you have that are going on. It's a fun thing to do with a border, so that you can put all of these little scraps that you had from creating your quilt, and you make a border using the same fabrics, but you don't do it in a truly regular way. Because if you want something like piano keys, that's one thing. This is something completely different. But if you wanted, let's say, flying geese to go around the outside, but you wanted them to be different, you could do something like this. Whether your flying geese are flying in rank order like we normally see them, or you put them end to end, or you do them more like a chevron. There's lots of choices of flying geese, but you can use this method to create those unusual blocks. Now, you could also take these and just line them up best you can improvisationally, right? Sew them together and create for yourself one long strip of whatever length, and then you could cut out a strip that you use as a border or as part of a block or something along those lines. Now, of course, when you cut it, you're going to have more scraps. What do you do with those scraps? Again, you can keep cycling these pieces down until they disappear. As a general rule, this scrap would be too large for me to do this with, but that's because I tend to do a lot of quilts with very, very small pieces. That's not for everybody. For some of the people that I talk to and that come to my classes, if they are doing something with a 2.5-inch square, they're nervous because that's tiny to them, and that's fine. That's one thing I like about this quilt that we are designing together. Whatever you have goes. So if you said to me, okay, Maria, I've got 12.5-inch wonky flying, 4 patches, and some 6-inch, well, then you can make your quilt using 12s and 6s. And what's also really kind of cool is, let's look at this one here. Let's say these bigger ones are just too big for you, or maybe the 4 patches. You just don't like working that large. There's no reason why you couldn't do some this size, but then also take some and do 4 patches that are smaller that make up a bigger one, like that. So these would overlap. Remember, we're going to lose on size here. But I hope you can imagine that this was, a light color here, but we could substitute in 4 patches, or actually, let me do this here on the table. You could take and do a 4 patch, maybe like this, with solid pieces on both sides. Let me bring this back down in like this. Might be easier to see. White on white's tough. I'm sorry. Actually, let me grab a couple that aren't white. It might be better that way. Okay. All right. So you could take these two and have other materials on the sides, so big, blocks the size of these 4 patches. You could do a whole 4 patch like this and put that in place of one of the 4 patches. So if you were doing a quilt, let's say it was all 4 and 8 patch, you could put a diagonal somewhere that was 4 patches done like this, or with the solids in the opposite corners. There's a lot of flexibility with adding smaller blocks in that would substitute for a plain block in your design. Now, if you were doing something with these, I would say this would probably substitute for a colored block, and then you'd have a light color next to it, and you'd have your 4 patch done that way. But that's completely up to you. There are some 4 patches that I have, for example, that have a light dark, but it's harder to see. Okay, so that's my light dark. Okay, with my light here. So in my case, upper left to lower right, which should be the way you're seeing it, but just in case I have it backwards for you. This is much more subtle. You're not going to get as much of that strong contrast and that diagonal line we talked about earlier. But there's no reason that these couldn't be, with 2 solid blocks here to add a little bit more interest in a block that has larger pieces. And then the block that you make out of these could also be cut wonky. So either the 4 patches could go in straight, or they could go in wonky, and then the whole 4 patch could be cut wonky. And you could really go to town and do some weird stuff with this. If this is your first time here, I think you'll find that thinking out of the box and doing things in a little weird way is how I tend to do them. But I do try to have us end on time at 8 o'clock. So I am going to go ahead and close for today. Please remember, if you enjoyed this, please like it and subscribe and then hit the bell. I am here every first and third Wednesday of the month, 7 o'clock Eastern time, for the live stream. At some point, I'm going to get these edited down into smaller chunks so that I can have like just the tips or other things that have come up in the conversations. But I would really love it if you ever want to come back and then write in the chat, or if there's any other things that come up that are of interest. But you're also welcome to email me at any time at mail@StashBlasterQuilts.com. And ask me any questions that come up. Have a wonderful week or two, and I will see you soon. All right? Let's go get some sewing done, all right? Bye-bye.